One single digit. That's all it takes to shift the axis of an entire universe. When 15-year-old Riley Morgan pressed send from the pitch-black confines of her bedroom closet, she thought she was messaging her older brother for salvation. She was wrong. Downstairs, heavy work boots were already splintering the hardwood. A predator was actively hunting her. But fate has a strange, brutal sense of humor. That desperate missed dial didn't vanish into the digital void. It lit up a cracked screen on the scarred wooden bar of a Hells Angels clubhouse 30 miles away in the Montana darkness. And when a terrified kid cries for help, even outlaws answer the call. The rain in rural Montana didn't just fall that March night. It punished the earth. It was a torrential, blinding downpour that turned the dirt roads outside Kalispell into slick ribbons of mud and drowned out all other sounds. For Riley Morgan, the deafening drumming on the tin roof of her isolated farmhouse was supposed to be comforting. White noise to help her sleep while her mother worked another brutal double shift at the regional hospital. Riley lay in her bed, staring at the ceiling, watching shadows dance across the exposed wooden beams. The house was old. Built in 1947 by her great-grandfather, it creaked and groaned like a living thing. Every settling floorboard, every gust of wind against the siding made her flinch. She hated being alone, had hated it ever since her father walked out 6 years ago, leaving nothing but silence and a forwarding address in Nevada that never worked. Her mother, Vivian Morgan, was a senior pharmacist at Kalispell Regional Medical Center. 38 years old with dark hair already streaked with premature gray from years of night shifts and worry. Vivian was the kind of woman who smiled through exhaustion, who packed extra sandwiches in Riley's lunch because she knew her daughter gave them to the homeless man who sat outside the library. She was gentle, kind, the sort of person who stopped to help injured birds on the roadside. Which made it all the more terrifying when Travis Holden first showed up 6 months ago. Riley remembered that day with perfect, horrible clarity. She'd been doing homework at the kitchen table when the sound of gravel crunching under tires made her look up. A rusted brown pickup truck lurched to a stop in their driveway. The door opened. A man stepped out. Tall, gaunt, with hollow cheeks and eyes that looked like they'd forgotten what sleep was. He wore stained jeans and a flannel shirt that hung off his skeletal frame like a shroud. Travis Holden, 40 years old, ex-convict, local drifter with a rap sheet that read like a catalog of human failure. Assault, theft, possession with intent to distribute. He'd done 8 years in Montana State Prison and walked out with nothing but rage and a delusional sense of grievance against the world. He stood in their yard that afternoon screaming, "Vivian, I know you're in there. You owe me." Riley had frozen a pencil hovering over her algebra homework. Her mother appeared in the doorway, face pale, hands trembling. She'd stepped onto the porch, positioned herself between the ranting man and the house, and spoken in a voice so calm it scared Riley more than the shouting. "Travis, you need to leave, right now." "You took something from me," he'd roared, jabbing a finger at her. "You think you can just steal from me and walk away? I want it back." "I don't know what you're talking about. Please leave before I call the sheriff." He'd taken 3 steps toward the porch before Riley bolted from the table and grabbed her mother's cell phone, fingers already dialing 911. Travis saw the movement. Something in his expression shifted from rage to calculation. He stopped, backed away, pointed at Vivian with both hands like finger guns. "This ain't over. You hear me? This ain't even close to over." He climbed back into his truck and roared away, kicking up a spray of gravel that cracked against the side of the house like buckshot. Sheriff Harlan Briggs arrived 20 minutes later, a solid man in his 50s with a weathered face and eyes that had seen too much of Montana's dark corners. He took Vivian's statement, drove out to Travis's last known address, and served him with a criminal trespass warning. If Travis set foot on their property again, he'd go straight back to prison. For 6 months it held, but Riley knew in the way children know things adults try to hide that her mother was terrified. Vivian started locking doors that had never been locked before. She installed a security system ancient and temperamental, but better than nothing. She made Riley memorize Garrett's phone number, even though it was already saved in her contacts. Garrett, Riley's older brother, 23 years old, stationed at Malmstrom Air Force Base 3 hours away. He was a weapons systems specialist, the pride of Vivian's life, the son who had escaped the gravitational pull of rural poverty through sheer determination and test scores. He called every Sunday, promised to visit on leave, told Riley to be brave, to look after Mom, to call him if anything felt wrong. Riley tried. God, she tried. But brave felt like a costume that didn't fit anymore. She rolled over in bed, reached for her phone on the nightstand. The screen lit up her face in the darkness. 11:47 p.m. Her mother's shift didn't end until 6 in the morning. 7 more hours alone. Riley pulled up her messages, scrolled to Garrett's name, typed out a quick text. Can't sleep, storm's loud, miss you. She hit send. The message turned blue, delivered. She stared at it, waiting for the 3 dots that meant he was typing back. They didn't come. He was probably asleep. Had to be up at 0500 for some training exercise or briefing or whatever it was military people did before the sun came up. Riley set the phone down, closed her eyes, and tried to let the sound of the rain lull her into something resembling rest. 30 miles away in a corner of Montana where the law ended and something older began, the Iron Riders clubhouse sat like a fortress against the storm. It wasn't much to look at from the outside. A low-slung building with corrugated metal siding, a gravel parking lot filled with gleaming motorcycles covered in tarps, and a single neon sign in the window that flickered the word closed in angry red letters. But inside it was a cathedral to a very specific kind of brotherhood. The walls were covered in photographs, black and white images of men on bikes stretching back decades, patches and colors from chapters across the country. A Hell's Angels death's head skull with wings spread wide hung above the bar like a heraldic banner. The air was thick with cigarette smoke, the smell of motor oil leather, and spilled beer ground into the floorboards over 30 years of hard living. Wyatt Sullivan sat at the far corner of the bar, nursing a mug of black coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. He was a large man, 48 years old, with a face that looked like it had been carved from granite and left out in the weather too long. His arms were covered in faded tattoos, a chaotic tapestry of skulls, eagles, flames, and script that told the story of a life lived on the margins. He wore a black leather vest over a plain white t-shirt. On the back of the vest, the death's head patch was surrounded by rockers that read Iron Riders on top and Montana on the bottom. They called him Ghost, not because he was quiet or sneaky, but because after his daughter died, part of him had stopped being fully present in the world. He was there, but not there, a shadow of the man he used to be. Sarah, 15 years old, bright, beautiful, full of questions about the universe and plans to study astronomy. She died 1 year ago from a fentanyl overdose, poisoned by a pill she thought was a painkiller, bought from a classmate who got it from God knows where. Wyatt had held her in his arms as the paramedics worked, watched the light go out of her eyes, and felt something fundamental break inside his chest that would never heal. He became Ghost that night. He stared at his phone, now lying face down on the bar next to his knuckles. It was a burner, a prepaid flip phone that only a handful of people had the number to. Club business. The kind of calls you didn't want traced back to anything official. Around him, the clubhouse was alive with low conversation and the sound of pool balls clacking together. There were maybe a dozen men scattered around the space. Brothers, members of the Iron Riders, charter the Montana chapter of the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club. They ranged in age from their late 20s to their 60s, united by the patch on their backs and a code that most of the world would never understand. At the pool table, Silas Maddox lined up a shot. They called him Iron, a nickname he'd earned 20 years ago when he took a tire iron to the face in a bar fight and stayed standing long enough to finish the job. He was 52 years old, broad-shouldered with a salt and pepper beard that made him look like a Viking who traded his longship for a Harley. He was the sergeant-at-arms, the enforcer, the man responsible for maintaining order within the club and dealing with threats from outside. He sank the 8-ball with a decisive crack. "Read it and weep, boys." Duncan Hayes, a younger member they called Bear, threw his pool cue down in mock disgust. At 35, he was built like a linebacker, all muscle and momentum. He had a laugh that could shake windows and a temper that had landed him in county lockup more times than he cared to admit. But he was loyal, loyal to a fault. 2 years ago, his younger brother had died from an overdose. Pills bought on the street laced with poison. Duncan hated the drug trade with a fury that burned cold and constant. The jukebox in the corner was playing Lynyrd Skynyrd. Simple Man. The bass line thrummed through the floorboards. Ghost's phone buzzed. He looked at it for a long moment before picking it up. The screen was cracked, spiderwebbed from the time he'd thrown it against a wall in a fit of rage he couldn't even remember now. He flipped it open. A new message glowed in the dim light. Unknown number. He frowned. His first instinct was to delete it. Unknown numbers on a burner phone were usually traps, cops trying to bait them into a sting, rival clubs probing for weakness, tweakers who got the number from someone they shouldn't have and thought they could score. But something made him open it. The message loaded. He broke in. He's downstairs. I'm in the closet. Please help me, Garrett. I'm so scared. Ghost stared at the words, read them again, then a third time. The noise of the clubhouse faded into the background. The pool game, the music, the low rumble of conversation. All of it became distant static. I'm so scared. Those 3 words hit him like a fist to the sternum. He stood up the bar stool, scraping loudly against the floor. Silas looked up from racking the balls for another game. He saw the expression on Ghost's face and his entire posture changed. He set the triangle down carefully. What is it? Ghost didn't answer. He walked over, phone in hand, and held it out. Silas took it, his thick fingers delicate on the small device. He read the message. His jaw tightened. Who's Garrett? No idea. Who sent this? Don't know that either. Duncan stepped closer, reading over Silas's shoulder. The playful energy drained out of him like water from a broken dam. Around the clubhouse, other members were starting to take notice. The pool game stopped. Someone turned the jukebox down. Silas handed the phone back to Ghost. This smells like a setup. I know. Cops could be fishing, trying to get one of us to respond, show up somewhere, and then hit us with felony interference or worse. I know. Duncan crossed his arms. Or it's a wrong number. Some kid trying to reach their brother and fat-fingered the digits. Ghost looked down at the message again. I'm in the closet. Please help me. His throat felt tight. He'd gotten a message like this once before, 1 year ago. From Sarah. She'd been at a party. Things had gone bad. She'd locked herself in a bathroom and texted him. Dad, help me. I took something and I don't feel right. He'd been 200 miles away on a run. By the time he got back, she was already in the ICU, brain swelling, organs shutting down. He'd made it to the hospital just in time to watch her die. He'd sworn, standing over her grave in the cold Montana rain, that he would never ignore a call for help again. Not from anyone. Not ever. Text them back, Silas said quietly. Find out what this is. Ghost's thumbs moved over the keys. The old flip phone was clunky slow, but he typed out the message carefully. Not Garrett. Wrong number. Who is this? Where are you? He hit send. The message disappeared into the digital void. The clubhouse was silent now. Every man in the room was watching, waiting. 30 seconds passed, a minute. Ghost's phone buzzed. Please don't leave me. My name is Riley. A man named Travis Holden broke in. He has a crowbar. He wants my mom. 4242 Pinecrest Road. Call the police, please. Duncan read the message over Ghost's shoulder and went very still. Did that just say Travis Holden? Silas's expression darkened. Yeah, it did. Ghost looked up. You know him. Every brother in this room knows him. Silas said, his voice dropping to a dangerous register. Travis Holden, tweaker, thief, owes the club $5,000 from a bad deal last year. Tried to fence stolen motorcycle parts without giving us our cut. We've been looking for him for months. Duncan's fists clenched. He's the kind of scum who'd break into a house and terrorize women and kids. Read the address again, Silas said. Ghost looked at the phone. 4242 Pinecrest Road. Silas turned to the rest of the room. Somebody pull up a map. Where's Pinecrest Road? A younger member, lean and wiry with a neck tattoo, pulled out his smartphone and started typing. Got it. Pinecrest Road, up the ridge past the old timber mill, about 3 miles from here. Ghost felt something cold settle in his chest. 3 miles. Close. Too close. Cops aren't going to make it out there, Duncan said. Not in this storm. I heard on the scanner earlier that a semi flipped on Route 9 blocking the only paved access. They'd have to take the long way around. Would take them an hour. Minimum. Silas looked at Ghost. This could still be a setup. I know. If we roll out there and it's cops waiting, we're done. I know. Silas studied his face. But you don't care, do you? Ghost thought about Sarah. About the message he'd ignored because he was too far away too late. He thought about a 15-year-old girl hiding in a closet, terrified, waiting for help that wasn't coming. No, he said quietly. I don't. The room was silent for a long moment. Then Silas nodded. He turned to the rest of the clubhouse, raising his voice so it carried to every corner. Listen up. We've got a situation. Travis Holden is currently breaking into a house on Pinecrest Road. There's a teenage girl trapped inside and the law isn't coming. Now Holden has outstanding club business anyway, but I'm not letting a kid get hurt on our doorstep. He pointed at the bartender. Lock the doors. Cut the music. He pointed at Duncan. Bear, grab your gear. We're riding. Duncan grinned, a savage expression that didn't reach his eyes. About damn time. Around the room, men stood up. Chairs scraped. Leather creaked. Boots hit the floor with purpose. They moved to the back room where their cuts hung on hooks, where weapons were stored in locked cabinets that had no legal inventory. Ghost pulled out his phone and typed one more message. Riley, do not make a sound. Do not leave the closet. We are 5 minutes away. He pocketed the phone, grabbed his heavy leather cut from the back of his chair and zipped it up. The death's head skull on his back seemed to catch the dim light of the bar wing spread wide like a promise of violence. Silas walked up beside him, strapping on a heavy chain wallet. You sure about this, brother? Ghost looked at him. She's the same age Sarah was. Silas didn't need any more explanation than that. He clapped Ghost on the shoulder, once hard enough to feel through the leather. Then let's go get her. As 12 men walked out of the Iron Riders clubhouse into the raging storm, the rain hit them like a physical force, soaking through denim and leather in seconds. But they didn't hesitate. They moved to their bikes, pulled tarps off, and threw legs over saddles with the practiced ease of men who'd been riding longer than some people had been alive. Engines roared to life. 12 Harley-Davidsons, heavily modified, built for power and noise. The sound was deafening, a synchronized thunder that shook the windows of the clubhouse and sent vibrations through the muddy ground. Ghost twisted his throttle, feeling the machine beneath him respond. The headlight cut through the rain, illuminating sheets of water that fell so thick it was like riding through a wall. Silas took point, leading the formation out of the parking lot and onto the dirt road that led toward the ridge. Behind him, the brothers fell into a tight column, 2 by 2, a mechanized cavalry charging into the darkness. They didn't speak. There was no need. They communicated through hand signals, through the positioning of their bikes, through an understanding that ran deeper than words. 3 miles. In good weather, it would take 5 minutes. In this storm on these roads, it would take 10. They had 10 minutes to reach a girl they'd never met, to stop a man they'd been hunting for months, to make a decision that would put them all at risk. Not one of them hesitated. At 4242 Pinecrest Road, the farmhouse was drowning in darkness. Riley had been in the closet for 23 minutes. She knew because she'd been watching the clock on her phone, watching the minutes tick by with agonizing slowness. The battery was at 8%. The screen dimmed automatically to save power, plunging her into near total blackness. Her mother's winter coats pressed down on her from above, heavy wool that smelled like mothballs and old perfume. The air in the closet was stifling, thick with dust and her own panicked breathing. She tried to stay quiet, tried to stay still, but her body was shaking so violently she couldn't control it. Downstairs, Travis was methodical. She could hear him moving through the house room by room, the crash of breaking glass, the scrape of furniture being dragged across floors, the heavy thud of his boots. He was calling out as he searched. His voice echoed up through the floorboards. Vivian, I know you're here somewhere. You think you can hide from me. A pause. The sound of something heavy being thrown against a wall. You took something that belongs to me. You think you can just steal from me and walk away? I'm going to tear this place apart until I find it. Riley pressed her hands over her mouth to muffle a sob. She'd read the response to her text message 3 times. We are 5 minutes away. 5 minutes. It had been sent 7 minutes ago. Where were they? Who were they? She didn't even know who she texted. The number should have been Garrett's. She typed it from memory, her fingers moving on autopilot in the dark. But the response came from someone named Ghost. She didn't know anyone named Ghost. Didn't know anyone who talked like that. Do not make a sound. Do not leave the closet. Commanding. Direct. The kind of voice that expected to be obeyed. But what if it was a prank? What if some stranger was sitting somewhere laughing at the desperate text from a scared girl? What if no one was coming? The sound of boots on the stairs made her freeze. Travis was coming up. You know what I think, Vivian? His voice was closer now, just on the other side of the bedroom door. I think you're not even here. I think you're at the hospital working your little night shift and you left your daughter all alone. Riley's blood turned to ice. He knew. Somehow he knew she was here. Is that you in there, little girl? Travis's voice was a sing-song mockery, the tone someone might use with a frightened animal. You hiding from me. The bedroom door opened with a long, slow creak. Riley could see the faint beam of his flashlight sweep across the gap beneath the closet doors. It illuminated dust motes dancing in the air right in front of her face. She held her breath. Your mama took something from me. Travis said, his boots moving slowly across her bedroom floor. A little black book. Real important. I need it back. You know where she keeps important things, don't you? He was at her desk now. She heard drawers being pulled out, contents dumped onto the floor. She hit it good. I'll give her that. But I've got time. I've got all night. His boots stopped. Right in front of the closet, Riley could hear him breathing. Wet. Ragged. The sound of a man who'd lived hard and was living harder. His hand touched the closet door handle. And then cutting through the storm, through the terror, through everything came a sound that didn't belong in this nightmare. A low mechanical rumble. Distant at first, then growing. Building. Swelling into a deafening roar that seemed to shake the very foundation of the house. Oh, it was the sound of engines. Not one, not two, a dozen. All pushing to the red line, all coming fast. Travis stepped back from the closet. Riley heard him move to the window. Heard him swear low and vicious. What the hell? Through the slats in the closet door, Riley saw her dark bedroom suddenly flooded with brilliant white light. It poured through the window like a searchlight, harsh and blinding. The shadows disappeared. Everything was illuminated in the stark, high-contrast clarity. She heard the engines cut. The sudden silence was almost as shocking as the noise had been. Then came the sound of kickstands hitting gravel, boots on wet ground, leather creaking. Travis backed away from the window, stumbling over Riley's backpack. His flashlight beam jerked wildly. No, 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 no. Downstairs, there was a moment of perfect, terrible silence. Then the front door exploded inward with a crash that sounded like the house itself was being torn in half. The deadbolt sheared clean through the wooden frame. The heavy oak door slammed against the living room wall hard enough to crack plaster. Holden. The voice that roared up from the ground floor wasn't human. It was the voice of something ancient and merciless. Something that had come out of the storm with a purpose. Get your sorry self down here right now. Travis dropped his flashlight. The beam rolled across the floor, illuminating the underside of Riley's bed in jerking manic arcs. He turned and ran for the bedroom door. But he stopped at the threshold, because standing at the top of the stairs, blocking the only way down, was a man the size of a mountain. Silas Maddox didn't say anything. He just stood there, water dripping from his leather vest. His salt and pepper beard soaked his eyes cold and flat as river stones. In his right hand, he held a heavy steel flashlight, not for light, for breaking bones. Travis looked at him, looked back at the window, looked at the closet where Riley was hiding. He made a choice. He lunged for the closet. His hand was 6 inches from the handle when Duncan Hayes stepped out of the shadows near Riley's bookshelf. He'd come up the back stairs, moved through the house like a ghost, and positioned himself perfectly. He didn't give Travis a chance to react. He simply drove his shoulder into Travis's chest with the force of a battering ram. The impact lifted Travis off his feet and sent him crashing backward into the drywall. The plaster cracked. A framed poster fell off the wall and shattered. Travis tried to swing, tried to fight. Duncan caught his wrist twisted and pressed him face first into the wall with one massive forearm across the back of his neck. "Thought you could swing on me, you rat." Downstairs, more boots were entering the house. Flashlight beams swept through the darkness. Voices called out in a language Riley didn't understand but recognized as coordination. Clearing rooms, securing exits. Ghost appeared in the bedroom doorway. He was soaked to the bone, rain dripping from the brim of an old baseball cap. His leather vest was dark with water. He took in the scene with a single glance. Travis pinned against the wall, Duncan holding him there, Silas standing guard. His eyes moved to the closet. He walked across the room slowly, deliberately. His boots avoided the debris on the floor. He stopped 3 feet from the closet doors and knelt down, bringing himself to eye level with the slats. His voice when he spoke was nothing like the roar that had shaken the house moments before. It was gentle, quiet. The voice of a man talking to something fragile that might break if handled wrong. "Riley?" Inside the closet, Riley flinched. Hearing her name from this stranger's mouth was surreal. "Riley, my name is Ghost. I'm the one you were texting." She didn't move. Couldn't move. "I know you're terrified," he continued, his voice steady and calm. "But the bad man is done. He can't hurt you. My brothers and I are here. You're safe now." He reached into his pocket and pulled out the burner phone. He held it up to the crack in the closet door, angling the screen so she could see it through the slats. "Look through the gap. You see the screen. You see your messages. We are 5 minutes away. That was me. You accidentally texted me instead of your brother. But it's okay, we got the message. You're safe." Riley stared through the darkness at the glowing screen. She could see it. Could see her own frantic words displayed in green text. Could see the responses from this man calling himself Ghost. Slowly, with trembling hands, she pushed against the bifold door. It squeaked open. She blinked against the sudden influx of light. Multiple flashlight beams illuminated the room now held by large men in leather vests who stood at the edges of the space like sentinels. Ghost stayed perfectly still, kneeling on the floor. He didn't reach for her, didn't move closer. He just waited, his weathered face gentle, his eyes filled with something that looked like profound sadness and profound relief all at once. Riley crawled out from beneath the pile of coats. Her clothes were covered in dust. Her face was streaked with tears. Her hands were shaking so badly she couldn't control them. She looked at the giant man kneeling before her. Then her eyes darted to the corner where Duncan still held Travis against the wall. "He wanted my mom." Riley choked out a fresh wave of tears spilling down her cheeks. "He kept saying she took something from him." Ghost pulled a clean bandana from his back pocket and offered it to her. "I know, kid, but he's not getting anything tonight. You were brave. You did exactly the right thing by reaching out." Riley took the bandana, wiped her face. The adrenaline that had been keeping her upright suddenly evaporated. Her knees buckled. Ghost caught her by the shoulders, steadying her with hands that were surprisingly gentle for their size. "Easy now, I've got you." He stood up slowly, guiding her toward the door, positioning his body between her and Travis. As they passed, Silas gave her a slow, respectful nod. "You're under the protection of the Iron Riders tonight, Miss Riley. Nobody touches you." They made their way down the ruined staircase. The living room looked like a war zone. Picture frames were shattered. The couch was overturned. Glass from the back door littered the kitchen floor. Several other members of the club stood guard at the windows and doors, their silhouettes backlit by the motorcycle's headlights still blazing outside. They stopped their conversations when Ghost brought Riley down. To a man, they averted their eyes or offered brief, solemn nods. It was a strange display of chivalry from men society had long ago written off as irredeemable. Ghost led her to the only upright chair in the kitchen. He opened the refrigerator, which Travis had kicked earlier, but hadn't managed to break, and pulled out a bottle of water. He twisted the cap off and handed it to her. "Drink. Sip it slow." Riley took the bottle with shaking hands and raised it to her lips. The water was cold, clean. It cut through the dust in her throat. Upstairs, there was a heavy thud followed by the sound of zip ties being pulled tight. Silas and Duncan were bringing Travis down. Ghost pulled a chair over and sat backward on it, bringing himself to Riley's eye level. "What time does your mom get off her shift?" "6 in the morning." Riley stammered, her teeth chattering despite the fact that the house wasn't cold. "She works at the pharmacy. She took a double." Ghost nodded, pulling out his phone. "What's her number? I'm going to call her. Let her know you're safe. Tell her she needs to come home right now." Riley recited the number from memory. Ghost dialed, putting the phone to his ear. It rang once, twice, 3 times. Voicemail. He tried again. Same result. "She's probably in a clean room or dealing with a patient," Riley said quietly. "She can't always answer." Ghost nodded, leaving a message this time. His voice was calm, but carried an edge that made it clear this was not a request. "Mrs. Morgan, this is Wyatt Sullivan. I'm at your house on Pinecrest Road with your daughter Riley. There's been an incident, but she's safe. Travis Holden broke in tonight. We've secured him and are waiting for the sheriff. You need to come home as soon as you get this message." He hung up, looked at Riley. "She'll get that. She'll come." Heavy boots sounded on the stairs. Silas and Duncan descended, half carrying, half dragging Travis between them. His hands were bound behind his back with thick black zip ties. His nose was bleeding, dripping dark spots onto his shirt. He looked like a man being led to the gallows. Duncan shoved him down to his knees in the center of the living room. "Keep him quiet. I don't want the kid hearing a word out of his mouth." Travis kept his head down, breathing hard. When he looked up, his eyes found Riley in the kitchen. There was no defiance in them anymore, just fear, pure animal fear. Silas walked into the kitchen, pulling off his wet gloves. He looked at Ghost, then at Riley. The hard edges of the biker softened slightly. "She okay?" "She's in shock, but she's unhurt." Silas nodded. He turned his attention back to the living room where another member was searching through the debris. "Our friend Mr. Holden here wasn't just coming by to harass her mother over a grudge. He was looking for something specific." Riley looked up, her red-rimmed eyes wide. Duncan emerged from the hallway holding a small, dented metal lockbox. It was old, scratched with a combination lock that had been forced open at some point and never repaired. "Found this under the bed in the master bedroom. Holden told us upstairs he tracked the mother down because she took something from him when he was admitted to the hospital last week for an overdose." Riley stared at the box. She recognized it. Her mother kept important documents in it. Birth certificates, the deed to the house. But 2 days ago, she'd seen her mother lock something else inside her face, pale, her hands shaking. "My mom," Riley whispered, the pieces suddenly falling into place in her mind. "She found something in his pockets when they brought him into the ER. She told my aunt on the phone. She said Travis had a ledger, a little black book with names of people buying stolen prescription pills from the pharmacy. She said someone on the inside was helping him steal them." Ghost lowered his phone from his ear. He stared at Riley, then at Silas. The atmosphere in the room shifted from protective to deadly. Silas's jaw tightened. "A ledger. Holden isn't just a junkie with a grievance," Ghost said, his voice dropping to a dangerous register. "He's running a pill mill out of the county hospital with an insider. He realized her mother took the ledger while he was passed out, and he came here tonight to destroy the evidence before she could give it to the police." Duncan set the lockbox on the kitchen counter. He pried the damaged lock open fully and lifted the lid. Inside, beneath a stack of documents, was a small black notebook. Moleskin, cheap, the kind you could buy at any gas station. But when Silas opened it, the pages were filled with cramped handwriting. Names, dosages, prices, dates going back 2 years. And in the margins, initialed authorizations. Verses. Silas looked up. "Who's VS?" Riley's voice was barely a whisper. "Dr. Vincent Shaw. He's the director of pharmacy services at the hospital. My mom's boss." The silence that fell over the kitchen was profound and terrible. Ghost stood up slowly, his chair scraping against the floor. He walked over to where Travis was kneeling and crouched down in front of him. "You brought your dirty pharmacy business to a house with a little girl. You broke in here to steal evidence to save your own skin, and you dragged us into it." Travis looked up, tears of panic streaming through the blood on his face. "Please, Ghost. I'll give you double what I owe. I swear to God, just let me walk away. I'll leave the state." You're not walking anywhere, Duncan said coldly. Ghost stood up, pulling his phone out again. He looked at Silas. Call Sheriff Briggs. Tell him to get a unit out here immediately. Tell him there's been a break-in. The intruder is subdued, and we have evidence of a major narcotics ring operating out of the regional hospital. Silas nodded, already dialing. Riley sat in the kitchen, wrapped in Ghost's oversized leather vest that he draped over her shoulders when she wouldn't stop shivering. It smelled like rain and tobacco and something else she couldn't name. Safety, maybe. She watched these men, these outlaws, moving through her destroyed home with purpose. They weren't frantic. They weren't cruel. They were methodical, professional. They'd come into a nightmare and turned it into something manageable. And they'd done it for her, a stranger. A kid whose desperate text had landed on the wrong phone. Ghost knelt down beside her chair again. The sheriff's about 45 minutes out. Storm's got the roads bad. We'll stay until he gets here. Why did you come? Riley asked, her voice small. You don't even know me. Ghost was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rougher than before, thick with something that sounded like grief held at bay by sheer force of will. I had a daughter once, Sarah. She was your age, 15. He paused, swallowed hard. She died a year ago. Overdose. Pills she bought from someone who told her they were safe. He looked at the black notebook on the counter. Pills that probably came from the same pipeline Travis and Dr. Shaw were running. Riley's eyes widened. I'm sorry. Not your fault, kid. He reached out and gently adjusted the vest on her shoulders. Sarah sent me a text one night. She was scared. Needed help. I was too far away. Didn't get to her in time. His eyes met hers. When your message came through tonight, I saw a chance to do what I couldn't do for her. I wasn't going to make the same mistake twice. Riley felt tears well up again, but they were different this time. Not from terror, from something deeper. Something that felt like gratitude and grief all mixed together. Thank you, she whispered. Ghost nodded. You're welcome. Outside, the storm was starting to break. The rain was still falling, but the fury had gone out of it. It was just water now, not punishment. And in the distance, barely audible over the sound of the weather and the idle rumble of 12 Harley Davidsons still parked in a defensive semicircle around the house, came the faint wail of sirens. Help was coming, the official kind, the kind with badges and reports and procedures. But Riley knew, sitting in that destroyed kitchen, wearing a leather vest 3 sizes too big, that the real help had already arrived. It had come on iron horses, ridden by men the world had long ago decided were beyond redemption, and it had saved her life. 47 minutes after Ghost sent his last message to Riley, the flashing red and blue lights cut through the breaking storm like strobes in a nightmare that refused to end. Sheriff Harlan Briggs's cruiser fishtailed up the muddy driveway, windshield wipers fighting a losing battle against the downpour. 2 more county vehicles followed behind him, their light bars painting the wet pine trees in frantic, urgent colors. Briggs was 50 years old with a face weathered by 3 decades of Montana winters, and the kind of cases that left permanent marks on a man's soul. He'd been a sheriff's deputy when the Iron Riders first established their charter in the county, had arrested half of them at one point or another, knew their faces, their bikes, their codes. He didn't like them, but he'd learned over the years that there were worse things in the world than outlaw bikers who kept to themselves. He stepped out of his cruiser and stopped dead. 12 custom Harley Davidsons were parked in a perfect defensive semicircle around the farmhouse, their headlights still blazing despite the engines being cut. Leaning against them, smoking cigarettes in the rain, were a dozen fully patched members of the Iron Riders. They looked entirely unbothered by the weather or the arrival of law enforcement. Briggs's hand moved instinctively to the radio clipped to his shoulder. Dispatch, I'm on scene at the Pinecrest address. Be advised we have multiple members of the Iron Riders charter present. Static crackled. Copy that, Sheriff. Do you need backup? Briggs looked at the men. They weren't moving, weren't reaching for weapons. They just stood there watching him with the patience of men who'd waited out plenty of cops before. Silas Maddox stepped forward from the ruined porch, his hands raised, palms open, showing he was unarmed. Evening, Sheriff. His voice carried over the sound of the rain and the idling police cruisers. Nice of you to join the party. Briggs unclipped his sidearm holster but didn't draw. Deputy Miller, a younger officer who'd gotten out of the second vehicle, had his hand on his weapon, eyes darting between the bikers. Maddox, Briggs's voice was flat professional. What the hell is going on here? We're not the problem tonight, Sheriff. We're the solution. That's what I'm afraid of. Ghost emerged from the front door and Briggs felt his jaw tighten. Wyatt Sullivan. He'd known Ghost for 20 years, had arrested him twice for assault, once for possession, watched him walk on a weapons charge because the search had been bad. But he'd also watched the man bury his daughter a year ago, watched him stand at that graveside in the rain with an expression that looked like the end of the world. Ghost didn't say anything. He just stepped aside and Riley Morgan appeared behind him. The change in Briggs's demeanor was immediate. He saw the teenage girl, saw the tear-streaked face, the oversized leather vest draped over her shoulders, the way she was shaking despite not being cold. He holstered his weapon completely and walked quickly toward the porch. Are you Riley Morgan? She nodded, her voice barely audible. Yes, sir. Are you hurt? Did these men do something to you? No. The word came out stronger than he expected. They saved my life. Briggs stopped at the base of the porch steps. What happened here? Riley took a breath, and in a voice that trembled but didn't break, she told him. Travis Holden breaking in during the storm, hiding in the closet, texting the wrong number. The bikers arriving like something out of a fever dream. As she spoke, Deputy Miller moved past them into the house. A moment later, his voice came through Briggs's radio. Sheriff, we've got a subject restrained in the living room. Travis Holden, wanted on multiple warrants. He's been zip-tied but otherwise unharmed. Briggs looked at Ghost. You didn't beat him. Didn't need to. Fear did the work for us. Miller's voice crackled again. Sheriff, there's also evidence here. A lockbox with what appears to be records of pharmaceutical theft and distribution. Names, dates, transactions. This is big. Briggs climbed the porch steps slowly. He looked at Riley, then at Ghost, then at the dozen men standing in his jurisdiction like an occupying army that had somehow ended up on the right side of something. Miss Morgan, I need you to tell me exactly what happened. From the beginning, every detail. Riley did. She stood on that porch in the dying rain and recounted the most terrifying night of her life. Briggs listened, taking notes in a small, waterproof pad he pulled from his pocket. Deputy Miller brought Travis out in handcuffs, loading him into the back of a cruiser. Another deputy photographed the scene, collecting the lockbox as evidence documenting the broken door, the shattered windows. Through it all, the Iron Riders didn't move. They just watched, silent sentinels, making sure nothing else went wrong. When Riley finished, her voice was hoarse. Briggs closed his notebook. Maddox, he called out. Sullivan, I need a word. Ghost and Silas walked over. Briggs looked at them for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Off the record, he said quietly. Thank you. With the storm and the highway accident, we wouldn't have made it here for another hour. Holden would have... He trailed off, shaking his head. I don't want to think about what would have happened. Silas nodded. Don't thank us, Sheriff. Just make sure Holden doesn't see daylight for a very long time. He won't. Not if this evidence is what it looks like. Briggs glanced at the lockbox being loaded into an evidence bag. Dr. Vincent Shaw, you know what this means if we can prove he's running pills out of the hospital. It means a lot of people are going to want him silenced before he can talk, Ghost said. Briggs met his eyes. I'll make sure the Morgans are protected. With all due respect, Sheriff, you've got 2 deputies and a county budget. We both know that's not enough. Briggs wanted to argue, wanted to assert that the law could handle this. But he'd been a cop long enough to know the difference between what should be true and what was. What are you suggesting? Nothing official. But if someone happened to keep an eye on this property for the next few weeks, you wouldn't hear about it from us. Briggs stared at him. I can't authorize that. Good thing I'm not asking for authorization. A car screeched into the driveway headlights, cutting through the thinning rain. Vivian Morgan practically fell out of the driver's seat, her hospital scrubs soaked instantly as she ran toward the house. Riley, Mom. The girl bolted off the porch and they collided in the muddy yard, collapsing into each other. Vivian was sobbing, her hands running over her daughter's hair, her face checking for injuries that weren't there. Riley buried her face in her mother's shoulder, finally allowing herself to break completely now that safety had a face and arms. Ghost watched from the porch. Something in his expression shifted, softened. Briggs saw it. The raw grief of a man watching something he'd never have again. "Go home, Sullivan," Briggs said quietly. "Get your boys out of here before I have to start writing reports that make this complicated." Ghost nodded. He whistled sharply, two piercing notes that cut through the sound of rain and weeping. Instantly, the iron riders began moving. Cigarettes flicked into puddles. Kickstands kicked up. Engines roared to life in a synchronized thunder. Silas mounted his bike, looking back at the sheriff. "We'll be around, Briggs. You won't see us, but we'll be around." The column of motorcycles pulled out of the driveway, their taillights disappearing into the darkness, like embers carried away by wind. Riley looked up from her mother's embrace, just in time to see Ghost's bike vanish around the bend. The sound of the engines faded, leaving only rain and the crackle of police radios. She felt the loss of that sound like something physical. 3 days later, Riley still wasn't sleeping. She tried. God, she tried, but every time she closed her eyes, she was back in that closet, hearing Travis's boots on the stairs, feeling the suffocating weight of winter coats pressing down on her. She'd lie in bed for hours staring at the ceiling, watching shadows that looked too much like moving figures. Vivian had taken emergency leave from the hospital. The house was being repaired. New locks, new doors, security cameras that actually worked. But Riley could still see the destruction in every corner. The patched drywall where Travis had been slammed. The empty spaces where picture frames used to hang. The kitchen chair she'd sat in wrapped in Ghost's vest while men with skulls on their backs had stood guard. She was sitting at that same kitchen table on Tuesday afternoon trying to do homework she couldn't focus on when her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Her heart jumped. For a second, she was 15 years old and terrified again, seeing words appear on a screen that would change everything. But when she opened it, the message was simple. "This is Ghost. Just checking in. How are you holding up?" Riley stared at the words. She hadn't expected to hear from him again. Thought that night was a one-time thing, a moment when worlds collided and then separated, leaving only memory. Her thumbs moved over to the keyboard. "How did you get my number?" "Your mom gave it to me. Asked me to check on you. Said you haven't been sleeping." Riley felt a flush of embarrassment. Of course her mother had noticed. Vivian noticed everything. "I'm okay." The lie sat on the screen, obvious and hollow. 3 dots appeared. Ghost was typing. "That's not what I asked. I asked how you're holding up." Riley set the phone down, stood up, paced to the window. Outside, the Montana landscape was recovering from the storm. The sky was clear. The roads were drying. Everything looked normal. Everything except her. She picked the phone back up. "I can't stop shaking. Mom says I'm safe, but I don't feel safe. Every noise makes me jump. I keep thinking he's coming back." The response came quickly. "That's normal. Your brain is still in fight mode. It thinks the danger isn't over, so it's keeping you alert. Give it time." "How much time?" "Different for everyone. Took me 6 months before I could sleep through the night after Sarah died." Riley felt something in her chest loosen. He understood. He'd been where she was. "Can I ask you something?" "Shoot." "Why did you really come that night? You said it was because of Sarah, but you didn't know me. You could have just deleted my text." The 3 dots appeared and disappeared several times. When the response finally came, it was longer than the others. "I got a text from Sarah the night she died. She was at a party, told me she didn't feel right, asked me to come get her. I was 200 miles away on a run. By the time I got back, she was already gone. I've spent a year thinking about that text, wondering what would have happened if I'd been closer, if I'd left immediately, if I'd made different choices. When your message came through, I saw a chance to do what I couldn't do for her. I wasn't going to waste it." Riley's eyes burned. She wiped them with the back of her hand. "I'm sorry about Sarah." "Me too, kid. Me too." She sat back down at the table, staring at her phone. The homework was forgotten. Everything was forgotten except this conversation with a stranger who felt less strange with every message. "Ghost." "Yeah. Thank you for not deleting my text. Thank you for sending it to the wrong number." Riley actually smiled. It felt foreign on her face, like a muscle she'd forgotten how to use. The next day, Ghost showed up at her house. Riley was in the living room when she heard the motorcycle pull into the driveway. The sound made her flinch, made her heart rate spike. But when she looked out the window and saw the single bike, the single rider, something in her settled. Vivian opened the door before Ghost could knock. She looked at him for a long moment, this large man in worn leather and faded denim, and then stepped aside. "She's in the living room. I'm going to make coffee." Ghost nodded, wiping his boots on the mat before entering. Riley stood up from the couch, suddenly self-conscious. In the chaos of that night, she hadn't really looked at him. Now in daylight, she could see the gray in his beard, the lines around his eyes, the tattoos that covered his arms like stories written in ink. He was carrying a white paper bag. "Brought donuts," he said, his voice less gravelly than she remembered. "Figured your mom's been too stressed to think about breakfast food." Riley blinked. "You brought donuts?" "Chocolate glazed. Gas station had them fresh this morning." It was such a normal thing, such a mundane, everyday gesture. It made something in Riley's chest crack open. Ghost sat down in the armchair across from the couch, setting the bag on the coffee table. He looked around at the repairs of the new locks, the cameras. "House is coming together." "Yeah." Riley sat back down, pulling her knees up to her chest. "Mom's trying to make it feel safe again." "Is it working?" "No." Ghost nodded like he'd expected that answer. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and looked at her directly. "You want to know what helped me after Sarah?" Riley nodded. "Talking to other people who'd lost someone, realizing I wasn't the only one walking around feeling like the world had ended. There's this thing your brain does after trauma. It tells you you're alone, that no one else could possibly understand what you're going through. It's a lie, but it's a convincing one." "I feel broken," Riley whispered. "You're not broken. You're hurt. There's a difference. Broken things can't be fixed. Hurt things just need time and the right kind of care." Vivian appeared with 2 mugs of coffee and a glass of juice for Riley. She set them down and lingered in the doorway. "I have some errands to run. Will you be okay here for an hour?" Riley looked at Ghost. He raised an eyebrow, a silent question. She nodded. "I'll be fine, Mom." When Vivian left, Ghost reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a small notebook. He opened it to a blank page and handed it to Riley along with a pen. "Write down every sound that scares you, every thought that makes you panic, every nightmare you have. Get it out of your head and onto paper." "Why?" "Because right now those fears are living in here." He tapped the side of his head. "They're all mixed together, feeding off each other, getting bigger. When you write them down, you make them smaller. You make them something you can look at instead of something that lives inside you." Riley took the notebook. "Did you do this?" "Every day for 6 months, filled 3 notebooks. Then I burned them." "Did it help?" "Helped enough that I'm still here." Over the next 4 weeks, Ghost came by 3 times a week. Sometimes he brought donuts. Sometimes he brought nothing but his presence and his willingness to sit in silence if that's what Riley needed. He taught her things, small things, practical things. How to breathe when panic started to rise. 4 counts in through the nose. 7 counts holding. 8 counts out through the mouth. How to ground herself by naming 5 things she could see, 4 things she could touch, 3 things she could hear, 2 things she could smell, 1 thing she could taste. He taught her situational awareness, not paranoia, awareness, knowing where the exits were, keeping her back to walls in public spaces, trusting her instincts when something felt wrong. "Your gut knows things your brain hasn't figured out yet," he told her one afternoon while they sat on the porch. Sarah ignored her gut the night she died. Stayed at a party that felt wrong because she didn't want to seem uncool. "I don't want you making that mistake." "I'm not Sarah," Riley said quietly. "No, you're not. You're Riley, and Riley is tougher than she thinks." It was during the 3rd week that Duncan Hayes showed up. Riley was doing homework at the kitchen table when the sound of 2 motorcycles pulling into the driveway made her look up. Ghost and another man bigger even than Ghost, with arms like tree trunks and a beard that made him look like a lumberjack who'd taken a wrong turn into biker culture. Ghost introduced him. "Riley, this is Duncan. We call him Bear. He's going to teach you some things I can't." Bear nodded at her, his expression serious. "Your mom okay with this?" Vivian appeared in the doorway, arms crossed. She looked at Bear, then at Ghost. "Teach her what exactly?" "Basic self-defense," Ghost said. "Nothing fancy, just enough so she doesn't feel helpless if something goes wrong." Vivian was quiet for a long moment. Riley could see the conflict in her mother's eyes. the desire to protect her daughter, warring with the knowledge that protection meant preparation. Nothing that will get her hurt, Vivian finally said. Just the opposite, ma'am. Things that will keep her safe. Bear was patient, gentle even despite his size. He taught Riley how to stand, how to balance her weight, how to make herself a smaller target. He taught her pressure points, where to strike if someone grabbed her, how to break a grip on her wrist, how to use her voice as a weapon. Loudest sound you can make, he told her during their second session. Someone grabs you, you scream like the world is ending. Most attackers want easy victims. You make noise, you make a scene, you stop being easy. Riley practiced screaming in the backyard, and it felt absurd at first, embarrassing, but then something shifted. The sound coming out of her wasn't fear, it was rage. It was power. It was every hour she'd spent shaking in the dark condensed into a single primal roar. When she stopped, Bear was grinning. That's the one. That's the sound that makes bad men run. By the fourth week, something had changed in Riley. She still had nightmares, still jumped at unexpected sounds. But there was a new layer underneath the fear, a foundation she was building brick by brick. She was in the kitchen one evening washing dishes when she heard a crash from the living room. Her whole body tensed, heart hammering. But instead of freezing, instead of hiding, she grabbed the baseball bat Ghost had given her, moved to the doorway and assessed. The cat had knocked over a vase. Just the cat. Riley set the bat down, cleaned up the broken ceramic, and realized halfway through that her hands weren't shaking. It was the first time since that night that fear hadn't paralyzed her. That same week, 300 miles away, in a corner office at Kalispell Regional Medical Center, Dr. Vincent Shaw was having the worst month of his career. Travis Holden had been arrested. The ledger had been seized. Federal investigators from the DEA were crawling through hospital records, interviewing staff, building a case that would bury him for decades. Shaw was 55 years old with a corner office, a Mercedes in the parking garage, and a vacation home in Colorado that he'd paid for with money skimmed from a pharmaceutical theft ring he'd been running for 6 years. He'd been careful, meticulous, used Travis as a middleman, kept his own hands clean, created enough plausible deniability that he thought he was untouchable. Then Vivian Morgan had to go and find the backup ledger. Shaw sat at his desk, staring at his computer screen, at the cascade of emails from hospital administration, from his lawyers, from investigators requesting his presence for yet another interview. His career was over. His freedom was measured in weeks, maybe days. Unless he could eliminate the evidence and the witnesses. He picked up his personal cell phone, the one that wasn't monitored by the hospital, and dialed a number he'd sworn he'd never use. The voice that answered was smooth, professional, empty of accent or emotion. "Yes, I need a problem solved," Shaw said, his voice shaking despite his attempts to control it. "What kind of problem?" "Two people, a woman and her daughter. They have information that could destroy me. I need them to go away before they can testify." There was a pause. "This is not a small request. I'm aware. Money isn't an issue. The price for two is $100,000. Half now, half on completion. Non-negotiable." Shaw felt his stomach turn. $100,000. It would drain his offshore accounts. But prison would cost him everything. "Agreed. When can it happen?" "We'll need details. Names, addresses, schedules, security situation. Send everything to the secure email I'm providing. We'll assess and contact you with a timeline." Shaw pulled up the files he'd already prepared. Information on Vivian Morgan, her shifts at the hospital, her home address, her daughter Riley, 15 years old student at Flathead High School. He hesitated for just a moment. Then he attached the files and hit send. "Done. Expect contact within 48 hours. The line went dead. Shaw set the phone down and poured himself 3 fingers of scotch from the bottle he kept in his desk drawer. His hands were shaking badly enough that he spilled some on the polished wood. He'd crossed a line tonight. Knew it even as he dialed in the number. But he'd come too far, built too much to let it all burn because of a nosy pharmacist and her daughter. He drained the glass, poured another, and tried not to think about the fact that he'd just ordered the death of a child. Ghost was at the Iron Riders clubhouse when Silas walked in carrying a manila folder and an expression that meant trouble. "We've got a problem." Ghost looked up from the carburetor he was rebuilding. "What kind of problem?" The kind that involves Dr. Shaw making phone calls to numbers that trace back to a cartel cleanup crew operating out of Arizona. Ghost set down his wrench. How do you know this? Because I've got a friend in the DEA who owes me a favor. They've been monitoring Shaw's communications since the arrest. Heard him hire a hit squad, 4 professionals. Target is Vivian and Riley Morgan. The temperature in the clubhouse seemed to drop 10 degrees. Ghost stood up slowly, wiping grease from his hands with a rag. When? They're assessing now. Timeline is probably within the week, maybe sooner. Ghost looked at the other members who'd gathered around. Where's the FBI, the marshals? Why aren't they protecting the Morgans? Because officially the case against Shaw is still being built. They don't have enough to arrest him yet, which means they can't justify protective custody for the witnesses. Vivian and Riley are civilians. As far as the system is concerned, they're safe. They're not safe, Ghost said, his voice dropping to a dangerous register. They're sitting ducks. Duncan stepped forward. So we make sure the ducks have teeth. We set up a perimeter, watch the property, intercept anyone who comes looking for trouble. Silas nodded. That's what I was thinking. Shifts. 2 men on watch at all times, armed, ready. Ghost shook his head. That's not enough. Professional hitters won't come at them head on. They'll wait, watch, find a moment when the Morgans are vulnerable. We can't be everywhere. So what do you suggest? Ghost was quiet for a long moment. We need to make Riley harder to kill. Right now, she's a victim waiting to happen again. We need to turn her into someone who can fight back. She's 15 years old, Silas said carefully. Sarah was 15. Didn't stop the world from killing her. Ghost's jaw tightened. Riley's already learning self-defense from Bear. We accelerate the training, teach her how to spot threats, how to react, how to survive. And if Shaw's people come before she's ready, then we make sure we're there to finish what she starts. That evening, Ghost drove to the Morgan farmhouse alone. No backup, no club colors, just a man in jeans and a plain jacket carrying knowledge he wished he didn't have. Vivian answered the door. She took one look at his face and knew. Something's happened. Can I come in? She stepped aside. Riley was in the living room doing homework with the TV on low. When she saw Ghost, her expression shifted from surprise to concern. What's wrong? Ghost sat down. Vivian perched on the edge of the couch next to her daughter. He told them everything. Shaw's phone call, the hired killers, the timeline. Riley went very pale. Vivian's hands started to shake. The police, Vivian said. We need to call the police. Sheriff Briggs knows. The FBI knows. They're limited in what they can do until Shaw is formally charged. That could take weeks. You don't have weeks. So what do we do? Riley's voice was small but steady. We run? You could, but professional hitters are patient. They'll wait, find you eventually. Vivian stood up, pacing. This is insane. This is absolutely insane. We're not criminals. We're not part of this world. We just want to live our lives. I know, ma'am, and I'm sorry you got dragged into it, but we're past apologies now. We need solutions. Riley looked at Ghost. You said we need to make me harder to kill. What does that mean? Ghost met her eyes. It means you stop being afraid and start being ready. It means you learn to see threats before they develop. It means that if someone comes for you, you know how to buy yourself time until help arrives. I've been training with Bear for 3 weeks, and you're doing great, but we need to take it further. I need you to understand that your safety isn't something other people give you. It's something you create for yourself. Vivian sat back down, her face in her hands. She's a child. She's a survivor, Ghost said quietly. She proved that the night Travis broke in. She didn't freeze completely. She reached out. She fought for her life with the only weapon she had, her phone. Now we give her more weapons. Riley stood up. Her mother looked at her in surprise. I don't want to run, Riley said. I don't want to spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder waiting for someone to find me. If they're coming, I want to be ready. Riley, Vivian started. Mom, I love you, but I can't live scared anymore. Ghost is right. I need to learn how to protect myself. Not just from this, but from everything, from the world. Vivian looked at her daughter, and Ghost saw the moment the mother realized her child had already made the decision. All that was left was whether she would support it or fight it. I want to be there, Vivian finally said. For the training. I want to know what you're teaching her. Ghost nodded. Fair enough. Tomorrow afternoon, the clubhouse. Bear Silas and I will show her everything we know about staying alive when someone wants you dead. He stood up to leave, but Riley stopped him. Ghost. Yeah, kid. Why are you doing this? You don't owe us anything. You saved me once. That should be enough. Ghost looked at her for a long moment. Sarah died because I wasn't there, because I didn't teach her how to recognize danger. Didn't give her the tools to save herself when I couldn't reach her. I can't fix that, can't bring her back, but I can make sure the same thing doesn't happen to you. Riley nodded slowly. I won't let you down. You couldn't if you tried. As Ghost walked to his bike, Vivian followed him onto the porch. Mr. Sullivan, he turned. Thank you for everything, for that night, for checking on her, for this. Ghost pulled on his helmet. Don't thank me yet, ma'am. The hard part is just beginning. He kicked the bike to life and rode away into the Montana evening, leaving behind a mother trying to accept that her daughter was growing up faster and harder than anyone should have to. Inside, Riley stood at the window watching his taillight disappear. She wasn't shaking anymore. Her hands were steady. Her breathing was calm. For the first time since that night in the closet, she felt something other than fear. She felt ready. 5 weeks after the night Travis Holden broke into her home, Riley Morgan stopped being afraid of the dark. It wasn't a sudden transformation. It was gradual, built from hours of training, with Bear conversations with Ghost, and the slow, painful work of rewiring a brain that had learned to associate nighttime with predators. She still had nightmares. Still woke up sometimes with her heart hammering, sheets soaked with sweat. But when morning came, she didn't carry that fear with her anymore. She carried preparation instead. The Iron Riders had set up a watch rotation on the Morgan property. 2 men always, hidden in the tree line with night vision scopes and radios. They worked in 4-hour shifts, silent and invisible, a perimeter that never slept. Riley knew they were there, could sometimes see the faint glow of a cigarette in the woods at 3 in the morning when she couldn't sleep and stood at her window. It should have felt invasive, should have felt like surveillance. Instead, it felt like being wrapped in armor. Ghost had taught her the signs to watch for. The same car passing the house multiple times, utility workers who showed up unannounced, anyone asking too many questions about her mother's schedule. She'd learned to photograph license plates with her phone, to memorize faces, to trust the prickle at the back of her neck that said something was wrong. Bear had taught her violence, not cruelty, violence. The difference between hurting someone and stopping someone. Pressure points that could drop a grown man to his knees. How to turn her keys into a weapon. How to use her elbows, her knees, her voice. How to fight dirty and fight to survive. There's no such thing as a fair fight when someone's trying to hurt you. Bear had told her during their last session. You do whatever it takes to get away. Bite, scratch, go for the eyes, the throat, the groin. Make yourself more trouble than you're worth. Riley practiced on a heavy bag in the Iron Rider's garage, her knuckles wrapped in tape, sweat dripping down her face. Ghost sat on a workbench, watching, occasionally calling out corrections. Hips into it. Let your whole body drive the punch, not just your arm. She adjusted through again. The bag swung harder. Better, again. By the time Vivian came to pick her up, Riley's arms were shaking from exhaustion, and her t-shirt was soaked through. But she felt good, felt strong, felt like something other than a victim waiting to happen. How is she? Vivian asked Ghost quietly while Riley packed up her things. She's ready, Ghost said. More ready than most adults I know. I don't know if I should be proud or terrified. Be both. It's what I would be. That night, Riley slept better than she had in weeks. Deep, dreamless sleep that lasted 6 full hours. When she woke up, it was to her phone buzzing on the nightstand. A text from Ghost. They're here. Riley sat up, suddenly wide awake. She looked at the time. 2:47 a.m. She looked out her window. The woods were dark, silent. But somewhere in that darkness, Ghost and his brothers had spotted something. Another text came through. 4 targets. Professional. Armed. Stay in your room. Do not engage. We've got this. Riley's heart started to pound, but it wasn't the same panicked hammering from 5 weeks ago. This was different. This was adrenaline with purpose. She got out of bed, moved to her closet, and pulled out the emergency bag Ghost had helped her pack. Pepper spray, personal alarm, flashlight, cell phone charger, water bottle. Everything she might need if things went wrong. She moved to the corner of her room farthest from the windows, the place Bear had identified as the best defensive position, and sat down with her back against the wall. Then she waited. In the woods 70 yards from the house, Ghost watched four figures move through the darkness with the kind of precision that made his blood run cold. These weren't tweakers, weren't desperate junkies looking to score. These were professionals. Cartel cleanup crew, just like Silas's DEA contact had warned. They wore dark tactical gear, carried suppressed weapons, and communicated through hand signals that spoke of military training. Ghost keyed his radio voice, barely a whisper. "Iron, you seeing this?" "Copy," Silas's voice crackled back. Four bogies, heavy arms moving on the east perimeter. They're spreading out. Two for the back door, two for the front. Let them get close. We take them in the choke point. Non-lethal if possible, but don't hesitate if they make a move toward the house. "Roger that. Bear, you in position." Duncan's voice came through. "Affirmative. I've got eyes on the two heading for the back. Waiting on your signal." Ghost adjusted his position, settling deeper into the shadow of a massive pine tree. He'd done this before. Ambushes, tactical operations. Back when he was younger, and the club ran jobs that required more than just muscle and loyalty. But that was a long time ago, before Sarah, before everything changed. Now watching these hired killers creep toward the house where a 15-year-old girl was sleeping, he felt something ancient and merciless wake up inside him. The two men approaching the back door moved past the old tractor, completely focused on the darkened windows of the farmhouse. They didn't see Silas step out from behind the rusted metal until it was too late. Silas didn't announce himself, didn't shout a warning. He simply reached out, grabbed the trailing man by the back of his tactical vest, and yanked him backward with the force of a hydraulic winch. The professional fighter tried to spin, tried to bring his weapon around, but Silas was faster. He brought the steel butt of his flashlight down on the base of the man's skull. The hitter dropped like a stone, unconscious before he hit the mud. The lead man heard the sound, started to turn. He found himself staring into the barrel of Ghost's weapon, the suppressor less than 6 inches from his face. "Drop it," Ghost whispered, his voice cold enough to freeze blood. "Or I paint the side of this house with what's inside your skull." The professional calculated his odds, realized they were 0. His weapon fell into the mud. "On your knees, hands on your head." The man complied. Behind him, Duncan materialized from the darkness, zip ties already in hand. Within seconds, both men were secured, dragged into the woods, and deposited in a clearing far enough from the house that any sound wouldn't wake the Morgans. At the front of the property, the other two killers were creeping toward the porch when a massive spotlight mounted on one of the hidden Harley-Davidsons snapped on, bathing them in blinding white light. They threw their hands up, temporarily blinded. Before they could recover, 4 iron riders emerged from the tree line, weapons raised, surrounding them in a tactical formation that spoke of practiced coordination. "Weapons down," Ghost's voice called out from the darkness behind the light. "Do it now or we drop you where you stand." The professionals weren't stupid. They assessed. 4 armed bikers, unknown number in the shadows, 0 cover. Their mission was already blown. They set their weapons down carefully. "On the ground, face down, hands behind your head." They complied. Duncan and 2 other members moved in, securing them with industrial zip ties, searching them for backup weapons. They found plenty. Knives, secondary firearms, garrots. These men had come prepared for wet work. Ghost stepped into the light, looking down at the 4 bound men. Professional killers reduced to prisoners in the Montana mud. "Who sent you?" Ghost asked, his voice conversational. The lead hitter, the one who'd been closest to the front door, spat mud. "Go to hell, biker." Silas walked up, crouched down, and pulled a hunting knife from his belt. The blade caught the spotlight, gleaming. He didn't threaten, didn't need to. His presence was threat enough. "Let me explain how this works. You were hired to kill a woman and a 15-year-old girl. That makes you lower than trash in my book. Now I can call the sheriff, hand you over, let you take your chances with the legal system. Or I can ask my questions a different way. Your choice. The professional's resolve cracked. These weren't cops bound by rules. These were men operating in the space where law ended and something older took over. Dr. Vincent Shaw, he said, his voice tight with pain and fear, paid us $50,000 up front, 50 on completion. Contract was for both targets. Clean, no witnesses. Ghost pulled out his phone, started recording. Say that again, for the record. The man repeated it, every word, captured in digital clarity. Ghost stopped, recording, looked at Silas. Call Sheriff Briggs. Tell him we've got 4 men trespassing on private property with intent to commit murder. Tell him they'll be tied to trees waiting for pickup. What about the girl? Silas asked. I'm going to pay a visit to the good doctor. Make sure he understands what happens when you send killers after children. Silas grinned, savage and cold. Want company? No, this one's personal. Inside the farmhouse, Riley sat in her defensive position, phone in hand, watching the minutes tick by. She'd heard muffled sounds from outside, voices, movement, but nothing violent, nothing that suggested the bikers had failed. Her phone buzzed. All clear. 4 targets secured. You're safe. Get some sleep. Riley let out a breath she'd been holding for what felt like hours. Her hands were steady. Her heart rate was elevated but controlled. She'd been ready to fight, ready to use everything Ghost and Bear had taught her, but she hadn't needed to. The armor had held. She texted back, "Thank you." The response came quickly. "You were brave tonight. Just being ready to fight made you brave. Remember that." Riley climbed back into bed, but she didn't sleep. She lay there staring at the ceiling, thinking about what Ghost had said. Being ready to fight made her brave. Not fighting itself, not victory, just readiness. It was a lesson she would carry for the rest of her life. At 4:17 a.m., Dr. Vincent Shaw's Mercedes sedan sat alone in the underground parking garage of Kalispell Regional Medical Center. Shaw had just finished a late consult, one of the few tasks he could still perform while under investigation. He was exhausted, paranoid, waiting for the phone call that would confirm the job was done. He pressed the unlock button on his key fob. The headlights flashed. He reached for the door handle. A massive leather-clad arm shot out from between the concrete pillars and slammed him against the side of his luxury car. The impact knocked the wind from his lungs, made stars explode behind his eyes. Ghost pressed his forearm across Shaw's throat, not enough to cut off air completely, but enough to make breathing difficult. His face was inches from the doctor's, close enough that Shaw could see the cold fury burning in his eyes. "Dr. Shaw." Ghost's voice was soft, almost conversational. "We need to talk about the 4 friends you sent to Pinecrest Road tonight." Shaw's face went the color of old paper. He tried to speak, couldn't form words. "They're currently zip-tied to pine trees waiting for the FBI. Funny thing about professional killers, when they get caught, they talk. Contracts, payments, employers, everything." Shaw's eyes widened with pure terror. "Please, I have money. I can pay you." Ghost's expression didn't change. "I don't want your money, doctor. I want you to listen very carefully to what I'm about to say." He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a register that vibrated with lethal intent. "Tomorrow morning, federal agents are going to arrest you. When they do, you're going to plead guilty to every single charge: pharmaceutical theft, distribution, conspiracy, and attempted murder, all of it." Shaw started to shake. "I can't. My lawyer said I could fight this. I could walk." "Your lawyers are wrong. And more importantly, you're going to leave Vivian and Riley Morgan completely out of your defense strategy. No testimony, no depositions, no mention of their names in any filing. They're ghosts to you. Do you understand?" "Why would I do that?" Ghost pressed harder against his throat. "Because if you don't, if you drag them through your trial, if you traumatize that girl one more time, the walls of a federal penitentiary won't protect you from us. We have brothers in every cell block in this country. Medium security, maximum, supermax, doesn't matter. We'll find you. And what happens then will make you wish you'd taken the death penalty." Shaw's legs were shaking so badly he could barely stand. Tears of absolute terror spilled down his cheeks. "I understand. God, I understand. I swear." Ghost released him, took a step back. Shaw collapsed against his car, gasping for air. "One more thing, doctor. That girl you tried to have killed, her name is Riley Morgan. She's 15 years old. She wants to be a pharmacist when she grows up. She volunteers at the crisis hotline, helping other kids who have been through trauma. She's a better human being than you'll ever be." Ghost turned and walked away, his boots echoing off the concrete. He mounted his Harley, parked in the shadows, and the engine roared to life. The sound was deafening in the enclosed space, making Shaw flinch and cover his ears. Ghost rode out into the pre-dawn darkness, leaving behind a broken man who would spend the rest of his life looking over his shoulder, waiting for the promise of violence to catch up with him. When he got back to the clubhouse, Silas was waiting with 2 mugs of black coffee. "How'd it go?" "He'll plead. Riley won't have to testify." Silas nodded. "Good, kid's been through enough." Ghost took the coffee, stared into the dark liquid. "She wants to come with me to the arrest. Asked me if she could be there when they take Shaw into custody." "What did you tell her?" "Told her I'd think about it." And the Ghost looked up. "What do you think Sarah would have wanted if she'd survived? If she'd been given a chance to face the people who sold her poison? Would she have wanted to hide, or would she have wanted to look them in the eye?" Silas was quiet for the moment. "She'd have wanted to watch them burn." "Yeah, that's what I thought too." 2 days later, Riley sat in the passenger seat of Ghost's truck, parked across the street from Dr. Vincent Shaw's home in a quiet subdivision north of Kalispell. The sun was just coming up, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that seemed obscene given what they were about to witness. Vivian had not approved, had argued, pleaded, tried to forbid it. But Riley had stood her ground with a quiet determination that reminded Ghost so much of Sarah it hurt to look at her. "I need to see it, Mom. I need to see that he can't hurt us anymore." Vivian had finally relented on the condition that Ghost stayed with Riley every second that they remained in the vehicle, that they left immediately if things became dangerous. Now sitting in the early morning silence, Riley watched as 3 black SUVs pulled up to Shaw's house. Federal agents in tactical gear emerged, moving with practiced efficiency. They surrounded the property, knocked on the door, announced themselves. Shaw emerged in handcuffs. 5 minutes later, his expensive suit rumpled, his face hollow. He was placed in the back of a vehicle. As it pulled away, the SUV passed directly in front of Ghost's truck. Shaw looked out the window. His eyes met Riley's. She didn't look away, didn't flinch. She just stared at him with an expression that was neither hateful nor triumphant. It was something else entirely. It was accountability. It was the gaze of someone who'd survived despite his best efforts to destroy her. Shaw looked away first. Riley watched the SUV disappear around the corner, carrying the man who tried to have her killed to a future measured in decades behind bars. "How do you feel?" Ghost asked quietly. Riley was silent for a long moment. "I thought I'd feel happy or relieved, but I just feel tired." "That's normal. Justice isn't revenge. It doesn't give you back what was taken. It just stops the bleeding." "Did seeing him get arrested help with Sarah?" Ghost's jaw tightened. "Sarah's case is still unsolved. We never found out who sold her the pills that killed her. Never got to watch anyone get arrested for it." Riley turned to look at him. "I'm sorry." "Don't be. What happened to you, what we're doing now, it helps in a different way. Gives me a chance to be the father I should have been. To protect someone the way I couldn't protect her." "You're a good man, Ghost. Sarah was lucky to have you as a father." Ghost's eyes went distant. "I wasn't there when she needed me most. That's not luck. That's failure. You're here now, for me. That counts for something." Ghost nodded, started the truck. "Come on, kid. Let's get you home. You've got school tomorrow." As they drove away, Riley looked back at Shaw's house one final time. Then she turned forward, eyes on the road ahead, and didn't look back again. 8 months later, the Flathead County Courthouse was packed for the trial of Travis Holden. Shaw had taken a plea deal just as Ghost had demanded. 25 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole. He'd given up everything, testified against his co-conspirators, and vanished into the federal system like a stone dropped in a lake. But Travis had decided to fight. His public defender had convinced him there was a chance, a slim one, to beat the breaking and entering charge if they could discredit Riley's testimony. Make her seem unreliable, a scared kid who'd exaggerated the threat in her panic. Riley sat in the front row of the gallery, her mother beside her, wearing a blue dress Vivian had bought special for the occasion. She looked older than 15, looked like someone who'd been forced to grow up too fast and had somehow survived the process. The defense attorney, a sharp-dressed man named Peterson, stood to give his opening statement. His strategy was obvious within the first 30 seconds. Attack the credibility of the teenage witness. Make the jury doubt her version of events. Ladies and gentlemen, the prosecution wants you to believe my client is a monster. But what evidence do they have? The panicked testimony of a teenage girl hiding in a dark closet. Can we trust her perception? Can we trust that she accurately assessed the threat level? Or was she simply a frightened child who... The heavy oak doors at the back of the courtroom swung open. Every head turned. 12 men walked in. They weren't wearing their leather cuts. The judge had forbidden gang insignia in his courtroom. Instead, they wore dark suits that strained against heavily muscled frames. But their tattoos were visible on their hands and necks, and the sheer presence they brought with them was undeniable. Ghost led the way, his imposing frame moving with quiet purpose. Behind him came Silas Duncan and 9 other members of the Iron Riders Charter. They didn't say a word, didn't cause a scene. They simply filed into the last 2 rows of the gallery and sat down with synchronized heavy thuds. They crossed their arms, locked their eyes on the defense table, and waited. Travis Holden turned around in his chair. When he saw them, the color drained from his face completely. He remembered. Remembered the night they'd come for him. Remembered the absolute certainty of violence in their eyes. Remembered being zip-tied and dragged through the mud like an animal. His hands started to shake. His breathing became rapid and shallow. Peterson, oblivious to his client's panic attack, continued his opening statement. We intend to vigorously cross-examine Miss Morgan. We intend to show that her testimony is... Travis grabbed his lawyer's sleeve, yanking hard enough to make the man stumble. Stop! Travis hissed loud enough for the first row to hear. Mr. Holden, we discussed this strategy. Look at the back of the room, you idiot. Travis's voice was rising, cracking with fear. Peterson turned, saw the 12 silent men staring at him with expressions that could freeze fire. If you humiliate that girl, Travis said, his voice shaking, I won't survive my first night in county. Change the plea. Change it now. Mr. Holden, we have a viable defense. I don't care. Change the damn plea to guilty. The judge leaned over his bench, frowning. Counselor, is there a problem? Peterson stood frozen, caught between his legal strategy and the reality of 12 dangerous men sending a message that transcended courtroom procedure. He looked at Riley, looked at the bikers, looked at his terrified client. Your Honor, Peterson said, his voice tight. The defense requests a brief recess to confer with my client regarding a potential change of plea. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Vivian let out a breath she'd been holding for 8 months and pulled Riley into a fierce hug. Riley didn't look at the defense table. She turned her head and looked to the back of the courtroom. Through the crowd, her eyes found Ghost. He was sitting quietly, his massive tattooed hands resting on his knees. The harsh courtroom lighting highlighted the gray in his beard and the deep lines of a life lived hard. But when he met her gaze, something in his expression softened. He didn't smile, didn't wave. He simply offered a slow, deliberate nod of profound respect. Riley nodded back. 10 minutes later, Travis Holden officially changed his plea to guilty on all counts. Breaking and entering, attempted assault, possession of burglary tools. The judge sentenced him to 15 years in the Montana State Prison. As the courtroom cleared, Riley and Vivian walked out into the bright autumn sunlight. Sheriff Briggs was waiting on the steps, looking uncomfortable in his dress uniform. Miss Morgan, Mrs. Morgan, I wanted to personally apologize for how long this took to get to trial. You shouldn't have had to wait this long for justice. Riley looked at him. It's okay, Sheriff. We had protection. Briggs glanced back at the courthouse where the 12 bikers were exiting through a side door, vanishing into the parking lot before reporters could swarm them. Yeah, Briggs said quietly. I suppose you did. Riley and Vivian walked to their car. Riley looked around the plaza, searching the faces of the dispersing crowd. But the men in dark suits were already gone. They'd slipped away like smoke, having ensured that justice was served on their terms. The sound of 12 Harley-Davidsons roared from the valley below, the engines echoing off the mountains. Riley stopped, closed her eyes, and listened to that thunder fade into the distance. It sounded like freedom. 1 year to the day after the night she'd sent a desperate text to the wrong number, Riley Morgan turned 16 years old. The farmhouse on Pinecrest Road had been transformed. New doors, new windows, a security system that actually worked. But more than that, it felt different. The fear that had soaked into the walls had been replaced by something else. Resilience, strength, the knowledge that darkness had come and been defeated. Riley stood in the kitchen wearing her volunteer badge from the Montana Youth Crisis Hotline. She'd started 3 months ago answering calls from teenagers in trouble. Kids who were scared alone, contemplating things that would end their stories before they'd really begun. She was good at it, knew how to listen, knew how to make someone feel heard when the world seemed determined to ignore them. She talked 2 kids out of suicide attempts, had connected a girl being abused to resources that got her to safety, had become the voice on the other end of the line that she'd needed that night in the closet. Vivian was making breakfast pancakes with chocolate chips, Riley's favorite since she was 5 years old. The radio was playing softly. Sunlight streamed through windows that no longer felt like vulnerabilities. "Big day," Vivian said, flipping a pancake. 16. I remember when I turned 16. Thought I knew everything. Did you? Not even close. But I thought I did, which is basically the same thing at that age. Riley smiled, took a sip of orange juice. "I've been thinking about college." Vivian looked up. "Yeah, I want to study pharmacy. Like you. Maybe go into drug safety protocols. Make sure what happened with Shaw's operation can't happen again." Vivian set down the spatula, walked over, and cupped her daughter's face in her hands. "Sarah would be proud of you. You know that, right?" Riley's eyes glistened. "I hope so. I'm trying to make the choice she didn't get to make, the choice to turn pain into purpose." They ate breakfast together, just the 2 of them, celebrating 16 years of life that had been fragile, then threatened, then fought for, and won. At noon, there was a knock at the door. Riley opened it to find Ghost standing on the porch holding a small wrapped package. He wasn't wearing his cut. Just jeans, a plain black t-shirt, and the kind of smile that looked unpracticed, like he didn't use it often enough to make it smooth. "Happy birthday, kid. You didn't have to get me anything." "I know. Open it anyway." Riley unwrapped the package carefully. Inside was a leather journal handmade with her initials embossed on the cover. She opened it. The first page had a handwritten note in Ghost's rough script. "For Riley. Write your story. Make it one worth reading. Ghost." Riley looked up, throat tight with emotion. "It's perfect. Figured you could use it for more than just writing down fears. Thought of maybe you could write down victories too. Things you're proud of. Things you have overcome. Build yourself a record of strength." "Thank you." Riley stepped forward and hugged him. Ghost went still for a moment, surprised, then carefully wrapped his arms around her, the embrace of a father who'd lost one daughter and been given an unexpected chance to help save another. When they separated, Ghost cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable with emotion. "So, pharmacy school, huh? Your mom told me." "Yeah, going to make sure kids don't die from pills they think are safe. Going to make sure the system works the way it's supposed to." "Sarah would have liked that. Would have liked you." "I wish I could have met her." "Me too, kid. Me too." They stood on the porch for a moment, looking out at the Montana landscape. The sky was impossibly blue. The mountains were sharp against the horizon. Everything felt clean, new. "You ever regretted?" Riley asked. Answering my text that night, Ghost thought about it. Really thought about it. About the danger, the complications. The way it had pulled him and his brothers into something that could have ended badly in a dozen different ways. Not even for a second. "Why not?" "Because you reminded me why I used to believe in redemption. Reminded me that sometimes the universe gives you a second chance to be the person you should have been. I wasn't there for Sarah when she needed me, but I was there for you. That means something. Maybe doesn't fix what's broken, but it means something." Riley nodded, understanding in a way most 16-year-olds couldn't. "Are you going to stay in touch after I leave for college?" "If you want me to." "I do. You're family now. Weird leather-wearing, motorcycle-riding family. But family." Ghost actually laughed a sound that came from somewhere deep that hadn't been used in too long. Yeah, I guess we are. He pulled out his phone, checked the time. I should get going. Got a chapter meeting this afternoon, but I wanted to give you this first. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small card. Riley took it. It was a business card for the Iron Riders with a phone number handwritten on the back. That's my personal cell, not the burner. If you ever need anything, ever, you call. Doesn't matter if it's the middle of the night or the middle of winter. You call and I come. That's the deal. Understood. Riley tucked the card carefully into her journal. Understood. Ghost walked to his bike, swung his leg over, and kicked it to life. The engine roared that familiar thunder that would always make Riley think of salvation arriving on two wheels. As he pulled out of the driveway, Riley stood on the porch and watched him go. She didn't feel sad, didn't feel abandoned. She felt grateful. Grateful that a single mistyped digit had connected her to a man who'd needed to save someone as much as she'd needed to be saved. That evening, Riley opened her new journal and wrote the first entry. 1 year ago, I sent a text message to the wrong number. I thought it was a mistake, but maybe mistakes are just the universe's way of putting us exactly where we need to be. I learned that strength isn't about never being afraid. It's about being afraid and doing the hard thing anyway. I learned that families aren't just blood. They're the people who show up when you're hiding in a closet, when the world feels like it's ending, when you need someone to believe in you before you can believe in yourself. My name is Riley Morgan. I'm 16 years old. I survived, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure other people survive too. This is my story, and it's just beginning. She closed the journal, set it on her nightstand next to the card with Ghost number, and looked out her window at the Montana night. Somewhere in that darkness, engines were rumbling. Leather-clad men were riding through the mountains living by codes most people would never understand. They were outlaws, criminals according to the law. But they were also the reason Riley was alive, the reason she could sleep at night, the reason she believed in second chances and redemption, and the idea that sometimes angels don't have wings. Sometimes they have tattoos and Harleys and a past they're trying to outrun. And sometimes they answer the wrong number at exactly the right time. Riley turned off her light, slipped under the covers, and fell asleep to the distant sound of thunder that might have been a storm, or might have been 12 motorcycles riding through the darkness, keeping watch over a world that would never know how much it owed them. She was 16 years old. She was a survivor. She was loved. She was protected. She was ready for whatever came next. And she was no longer afraid.